So as the new year approaches, all of us start thinking about those changes we want to make or those New Year's resolutions that we want to see happen in our lives. I started reading some stats this week that share that only 9% of Americans actually complete their New Year's resolutions by the end of the year. And then it goes on to say that only 23% of them actually make it through the first week, and then 43% of them actually end up quitting by the end of the month. And so what if this year, instead of all the goals and the resolutions, what if we were to do something different this new year? I started reading a book last year called The Intentional Year, and it was all about, instead of resolutions and goals, it was about creating rhythms in our lives, rhythms that God has put in our lives to make our lives better. And as I read this book, I started thinking about the changes that could take place in my life and in your life. And so over the next few weeks, as we enter this new year, we're going to go through this series called The Intentional Year and go through this book together. This book covers all kinds of topics like prayer, rest, renewal, relationships, our work life, and our finances. And if we can learn to create better rhythms in those areas, we'll get to see how our lives can improve and we can start the new year a different way. I actually got this book from our music director, Grace Young, because she was so inspired after reading it, she started passing it out to everyone. And today, as we kick off this series, Grace is going to help us all learn about this first new rhythm. And as we learn about this new rhythm, hopefully it will give us a new way to look at this new year.
Hey friends, it's almost here. 2024, a new year. I always get so excited at the new year because I'm a planner by nature, and I love to get a new planner and I love to lay out my year and think about my goals and try to figure out what the new year is going to look like. Last year I had the opportunity to read a book called The Intentional Year. And this book actually helped me to optimize my process and to go a lot deeper into the concepts that I've been working on in my spiritual life for the last decade or so. In the book, we actually go and reflect on the past year, and then we look forward to the new year, and we think about all these different areas of our life and how we can improve on them based on how it went in the past year. The book was really awesome for me in 2023, and I'm super excited to go deeper with it in 2024 with you guys. Now, I have to say that it's not full of a bunch of new concepts. It goes over the core concepts of life that we're already very familiar with. But as life changes and as seasons pass, we go over these concepts in deeper and different ways each time. And it's an opportunity to experience new healing, and it's an opportunity to experience new growth. We see in the Bible, God has given us all the information we need to improve and to live a spiritually and physically fulfilled life. And this book is an incredible reminder to help just make connections between those concepts and our actions in the new year. The book suggests actually going on a retreat. You can do an hour of a retreat, or you can actually go on a whole weekend away. Now, this might sound kind of scary and terrifying for some people, because if this is your first time doing that, not having a phone, not having books, not having any kind of media with you, just you and God, we can wonder, what's that going to be like? Is God mean? Is God, this kind of scary force to be one-on-one with? We don't have any distractions to lean on. Well, thankfully, the Bible has told us that God is a still, small voice. In our experience of Him, it's a very peaceful presence for us to abide in and for us to commune with. While we talk about each sphere of life over the next few weeks, just carve out maybe an hour a week or some time each week that you can consistently show up for to go through the steps. By the time we're done, you'll actually have your entire new year planned out. And I promise you, it's going to make a huge difference for us all. The intentional year begins by suggesting some things to watch out for while we make our goals for the new year. Before we start to this process, we have to recognize what might get in our way and try to remove these things so we can move forward uninhibited. If improvement were easy, everybody would have already done it and we wouldn't need each other as much as we do. But the first thing we have to do is remember that we are not alone. We are all aware of this huge industry that's called self-help or self-improvement. Growth does require us to take that journey alone, to make those steps and to take action. And some things we do on our own, but thankfully we have a support where we can lean on each other in church, where we can encourage each other, and we're always in God's presence. The Bible says that God is actually the reason why we desire to improve it all. We read in Philippians 2, verse 12 through 13, "For God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases Him." Another thing to watch out for is that we have to ditch our all or nothing thinking. We have to enjoy the journey. Ditch perfectionism, because that mentality just doesn't serve us well. Everyone will have off days and trouble spots. When we're talking about God and keeping our lives healthy and in check, we do the best we can and we follow God's example by offering ourselves grace and forgiveness when we stumble. We learn, adapt, and will improve our methods as we continue on. So you've probably heard these words before. There's a popular passage in the Bible, in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's kind of a poem. It reads, "For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up. There's a time to cry and a time to laugh. There's a time to grieve and a time to dance. There's a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to turn away. A time to search and a time to quit searching. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be quiet and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace." We often stop right there in the passage because it's really beautiful. But read what's written next. What do people really get for all of their hard work? I have seen the burden God has placed on us all, yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I concluded there's nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. So friends, in our effort to draw closer to God this year and to improve ourselves, let's remember to enjoy ourselves. Enjoy the journey and be happy. The last hurdle that we have to mention is we can't live on autopilot. It's something we have to watch out for every single day. Life happens to us all, just like that passage said. And seasons change and they bring with them different challenges and different stressors. But if we aren't careful, we can end up checking out and going into a sleep-like default or autopilot mode, just stumbling through our days, endlessly scrolling and depleting our spiritual, emotional, and physical wellness. If we think of a garden or a field or maybe a forest like this one, we know that you have to plant certain seeds for a crop to grow. If you do nothing, then you'll have invasive species take over your field or your garden, and nothing good will come from that. They'll take the land up for themselves. But to grow a productive and useful garden or crop, you have to be intentional. You have to plant very specific seeds and you have to tend to them in very specific ways at a certain time, consistently, and then they have to be harvested also at an appropriate time. Life is just like that. The worst thing we could do is let our days, our seconds, and our hours, and our years just become fallow ground, letting just anything grow up there. We need to interrupt that autopilot mode and wake up and show up for our days, keeping our life in order so that what does grow there is intentional and beneficial. We read in 1 Timothy chapter 4, "Train yourself for a holy life. Practice these things and live by them so that your progress will be visible by all. Focus on working on your own development and on what you teach. You will save yourself and those who hear you." Peter tells us exactly what seeds to plant and what our improvement track actually should look like in a letter he wrote to a church over 2,000 years ago. He said that we need to start with our faith in God, and then explains how to add layers onto that growth to live the full life that God intends for us to honor him. He writes, "In view of all of this, make every effort to respond to God's promise. Supplement your faith with a generous provision of moral excellence. To moral excellence, add knowledge. To knowledge, add self-control. To self-control, add patient endurance. To patient endurance, add godliness. To godliness and brotherly affection, to brotherly affection, add love for everyone." The more you grow like this, the more productive and useful you will be in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? There's a lot of passages in the Bible that actually lay out for us exactly how to improve our lives. And those are the passages we're going to be using over the next few weeks as we go through the different areas of our lives together. So for each area of our life that we're going to discuss, we're going to be following this rhythm that I already mentioned to assess where we've been and where we're going. And the first step we're going to call reflect. We have to take inventory of the past season, and we have to listen. Was it fruitful or not? Just stop and be quiet at some point this week. Don't do anything else, just listen. Make that space. What's God telling you about the coming year? Is there something you know you need to improve on based on what happened last year? Or something that you unexpectedly started feeling about how to move forward? Does a specific image or word come to mind? Is there something he wants you to experience this year? A year without gossip? Maybe a year without cynicism, or the news, or social media, or online shopping? As you reflect, make sure you remember the highs and the lows from the last year. Remember where God's goodness was present and evident. And then even when our distractions and our emotions sidelined us. Name those struggles, but name those gifts also. I love this meme that reminded me recently that dry seasons are not the whole story. There's plenty of life in the past, and there's plenty of life in the future beyond a particular difficult time. The second step after we reflect is to look ahead. We ask God where we're going. We ask him where he wants us to go in 2024. God always desires our efforts to listen to him and to obey him. Knowing and trusting in his wisdom and his love for us, he will answer those prayers and he will speak to us. By doing this, we abide in him. We surrender to his will for our lives. And the cool thing is that God has actually chosen to reveal himself to humans. Isn't that incredible? He wants to reveal himself more to you this year than you've ever experienced him before. So using the method of reflecting and then looking ahead, today we're going to really just focus on prayer. What was your prayer life like in 2023? Was it prolific or was it lacking? Each year, I like to try a new method of prayer based on where I'm at, based on what is going on in my life, and based on what I'm capable of doing that year. Honestly, there's probably no wrong way to pray, as long as you're sincere and spiritually hungry. If you feel like you need to learn how to pray, don't worry. There are so many resources out there that we will be offering you guys all through the next weeks. There are many, many methods of prayer, but I'm going to share with you just a few that I have found a lot of joy in over the last 15 years of my life. The first one is pray through the Psalms. The Psalms are a book in the Bible that Christians and Jewish people have been praying through for over 3,000 years. It's a tried and true method of learning the language of prayer and also of learning how vulnerable we can be with God. The book is full of protests, it's full of praises, it's full of petitions, and it teaches us so much about going deep with God. We all probably have a compartment of some sort filled with stuff that we don't always know how to file away mentally and that we don't think to bring to God. And the Psalms, they dig right into this kind of stuff. We actually read through the Bible kind of like what I'm explaining here in our small group. Each week we meet and we read through a chapter or two together, and then we discuss it maybe a little bit. But then that week when we go home, we look back over it again. We pray, we read through it again, and then when we come back together, we share what our new insights might have been in that scripture. And doing that alone and then also coming back together with a group of people has been really, really cool for my husband and I to experience over the last few years. Another thing that you can do to experience prayer is to take a silent retreat. It's an important practice of prayer. When was the last time you had a silent retreat? No phone, no media, no books, no distractions, nothing. Just silence and listening. Unfortunately, our surroundings are full of noise and chatter and chaos and news. But if we don't take regular breaks, this stuff will infect us so that we don't have peace or silence within anymore. All we hear are these voices and this conflict. And if we truly want to experience God, it could be just for an hour, or it could just be the whole weekend that's suggested in the book. But we have to carve out and set aside that time intentionally. There are spiritual retreat centers all over the country that are set up just for this purpose, for people to go there and pray. Now, like I said earlier, it is normal to find this kind of terrifying. This is very different than our normal day-to-day busy lives. That's okay. It will be hugely beneficial for your lives. I mean, I know this is a huge priority for me in 2024, to carve out more time each week, even just an hour, and go to God, no distractions, and just have a silent retreat with Him. Another method of prayer to explore is to try to keep a prayer journal. This is another one of those that I actually did last year. I have a prayer journal that has 2 pages for each week, and on the one page I would write down on each day some of the prayer requests I had heard that day, or some of the prayer requests I myself had. And on the other side, I would just start writing people's names that came up in my mind while I was praying. And by the end of the week, usually both pages are completely full of people. When I saw a prayer answered, I would actually write it down in bold letters so that I could see the prayers being answered physically. And it was such a beacon of hope for me on hard days to look back through that prayer journal and see God's hand moving in my everyday life. Prayer does not have to be complex. Honestly, you can just copy down words from the Bible. In 2016, I had a really difficult year where I was grieving. And in that time, I didn't have any energy or space for being creative about prayer. I could barely show up for it. I mean, that's all I could do. So what I started doing was just waking up early, and I would just simply copy down a chapter or 2 of the Bible, word for word. And in that process, it gave me words to anchor my life with. And it helped just pull me through that season and get me through that season so that I could then see God's goodness working in me again. Some might connect with God the most in nature. Some might connect with God the most in research or studying. Some might connect with God the most through singing music or just with hanging out with others or having a mentor relationship where they discuss their spiritual and everyday lives. How do you think you connect with others the best? There's a good chance that that's exactly how you're going to connect with God the best. It's a relationship after all. Is it in quality physical time? Or maybe just thinking or reminiscing about someone makes you feel connected to them? Is it in taking in someone's words or in speaking to them yourself? Is it in serving them physically or sorting through those good memories? It's likely that you'll relate to and enjoy getting to know God in these similar ways. And all of the ways that we relate to God and spend time with Him are types of prayer and fellowship. Ultimately, just find what works for you and let yourself experience God in new ways this year. So your first assignment for this week, there's 4 things I'm going to ask you to do. The first thing is get out a journal and look back on your 2023 year. Write down what your prayer life was like. Name your struggles and your victories. And then go to God in prayer. Ask God what He wants for you in 2024. And then listen for a while, no distractions. Put them all away. Pay attention to what He is urging in your heart. Pay attention to what images might pop in your head or what feelings you're having at that moment, and write those down. The third thing you're going to do is then use that feedback that you received during that quiet time, and you're going to choose a kind of prayer this year based on how you're being led. What do you think will make that difference and improve your prayer life from last year to next year? Your last thing is to then make some action steps. Carve out and protect a time on your calendar to pray. It might be a Saturday morning. It might be a drive between work and home with no radio on. But make sure that you're intentional to carve out that time so that you can really take action this year. I want to end by leaving you with an encouragement. On the cusp of a new year, a year that I have to believe is going to change us and is going to change our world. I believe that we intentionally stay connected to God, and that when we do that, we are growing in new and unexpected ways, even as the world continues to evolve rapidly around us. God put each of us here at this perfect time with His perfect intention to be bright lights in a darkening and troubled world. To be able to point to our rescuer and our shield, Jesus Christ. He is with us. In a time when hope is dim and when our world events can be painful and confusing, being able to point to Him changes everything. I believe it more every day. And we both have to hold on to this hope and practice reconnecting with Him daily. I can't help but be excited and thrilled about what God's going to do in our lives and in the world in 2024. When my kids were little, we used to start our days by reciting this Bible verse that I find incredibly hopeful and beautiful. And as I was praying this year, it kept coming back up in my mind when I was thinking about 2024 as a reminder to be hopeful, to look for what God is doing, to see what He's done. So I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to read this over all of us as a reminder for our new year. We read in the book of Luke, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because He has come to His people and has redeemed them. He came to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve Him without fear in holiness and righteousness before Him for all of our days. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, because you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for Him, to give His people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, Because of the tender mercy of our God, the morning light from heaven is about to break upon us, to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Peace be with you, friends, and may the Lord be with you always. Happy New Year.
Wow, as always, our team just does an incredible job. It's such a blessing to serve with them. I'm sure you got a lot out of that. I know that I did. Hey, listen, I just want to remind you that next week we'll be back live and in person at all of our campuses, and we look forward to seeing you there.